lecturer in the Computer IT department at LG Polytechnic. We will see constraints which are used in the database system to restrict the data to be entered into the database in this tutorial. Constraints. Constraint means a set of rules, or we can say conditions. Constraint means restrictions enforced on the database. Constraints bind user to enter particular values which satisfy certain criteria in the database. Take an example of Gmail account. If I am going to create a new account with Gmail ID Viti Patel, then it returns me an error which says that this username is already used. Try with another mail ID because mail ID cannot be duplicated. If you are creating mail ID in different sites such as Yahoo and Gmail, then you can use the same username, or we can say mail ID for two different websites. After that, creating a password, there are certain conditions available like length of the password must be between 8 to 14 characters. It must contain special characters, numbers, capitals and small letters. All these are the conditions which are applied on the data to be entered in the database, which is called as constraint. We can define constraint as a constraint is a rule that restricts the value that may be present in the database. The data stored in the database should be valid, correct and consistent. So, when data is manipulated, some rules, constraints should be followed. Oracle provides various kind of constraints to ensure validity, correctness and consistency of the data in a database. Constraints are applied on the attributes on the columns. The constraints can be broadly classified into two categories. One is entity integrity constraint and second is referential integrity constraint. Let's start with the entity integrity constraint. Entity integrity constraints are the constraints that restricts the value in a row of an individual table. These constraints are further divided into two subcategories, which are domain integrity constraint and key constraint. Domain integrity constraints specify that the value of each column must belong to a domain of that column. For example, a balance for any record in account table in the banking system should not be a negative value. Or branch name must be from the set of branches Ahmedabad, Surat and Vadodara. Oracle provides two constraints, NotNull and check, to provide domain integrity. Next one is a key constraint. Key constraint ensure that there must be some way to distinguish two different records of the same table uniquely. Oracle provides two constraints, unique and primary key, to ensure this kind of uniqueness between two different rows. And next is referential integrity constraint. Referential integrity constraints specify that a row in a one table that refers to another row must refer to an existing row in the table. Oracle provides foreign key constraint to ensure such kind of consistency. In this tutorial, we will see entity integrity constraint. Referential integrity constraint will be seen in the another tutorial. Let's start with the unique constraint. From the name, we can understand that unique means no duplicate values allowed in the column. When you make any attribute, any column unique, then duplicate values are not allowed. Only unique values can be entered. Let's take an example of student relation. Apply unique constraint on the contact number attribute in student relation. By defining a unique constraint, user cannot enter duplicate value for contact number attribute. We cannot apply a unique constraint on the name attribute because it may be possible that two or more students have the same name. Next constraint is a not null. Null means empty, means a value which is not available or missing for that attribute, or we can say that value is not applicable to the attribute. Null is not equal to 0 because 0 is also a value, whereas null means empty or a blank. Let's suppose I take an attribute email. If any student doesn't have a mail ID, then he or she leaves the value blank, or we can say that empty. But if I have defined email ID attribute as a not null attribute, then it cannot be empty. In many web forms, We fill the data, then we have observed that a red star is present with a label. It is a mandatory value. It indicates that value cannot be null. User has to write some values. It may be a numeric value, character value, or alphanumeric value. Let's suppose I take an attribute class from a relation student. I have defined the class attribute as a not null. Means whenever any student is added in relation student, then class will be allocated to that particular student. Now the next constraint is a combination of unique and not null, which is primary key. Primary key means unique plus not null. When the primary key is defined on any attribute, then any duplicate value or null value is not allowed for that particular attribute. Now, if we talk about student ID attribute in student relation, primary key is assigned to the student ID attribute. So, every student has student ID and it cannot be duplicated. It is not possible for a student which has not a student ID in a student relation. Whenever a student gets admission, at the time of admission, student ID is allocated to the student and that student ID is unique in the student relation. Next constraint is a check constraint. Check means value is checked before entering into the database. Suppose we have column age in the table student. If I enter -20 as a value of age attribute, but -20 value for age attribute is not possible. User can enter any value. So to prevent from this, we apply check constraint on that attribute age. Like age is greater than 18 means user cannot enter value 10 for attribute age because 10 is less than 18. User can enter value 20 for age attribute because it satisfies a given condition. Check means if we want to fix a particular domain for the attribute, suppose in account relation, check constraint is applied on the branch name attribute with domains Surat, Vadodara and Ahmedabad. We can check all these values using the in operator. In operator is used to check multiple values for a single attribute. So user cannot enter value other than Surat, Vadodara and Ahmedabad for attribute branch name in account relation. We have seen unique constraint, not null, primary key and check constraint. Duplicate values are not allowed when unique constraint is defined on an attribute. Null means an empty field is not allowed when not null is defined on the attribute. Primary key is the combination of unique and not null. So when the primary key is defined, then duplicate values and null values are not allowed. Check constraint check the condition for value before entering in the database. You can apply multiple combinations of constraint on a single attribute. Suppose in student relation, we have applied not null and check constraint on the address attribute. But all the combination of constraint are not possible. Suppose you want to apply unique and not null constraint, then it is better to apply primary constraint rather than combination of unique and not null. There are some important questions available for this tutorial. Let's see them one by one. First one is, can we apply a combination of constraint on an attribute? Next one is, list the domain integrity constraint. Next one is, list the key constraints. Next question is, which constraint is the combination of unique and not null constraint? And the last one is, state a real life example where check constraint is used. You can write your answers into the comment section. We have seen entity integrity constraints which are used in database system in this tutorial. This concept is very useful in the database system. If you have any doubt or query regarding this tutorial, then you can write it into the comment section. If you want to watch another tutorials of this series, then the link is available in the description box. If you like the video, then press on the like button and share the video. Stay tuned with us for watching new videos of this series. Thank you for watching this video.